Okay. There we go. Good. Carol's coming. We'll wait just a second. Carol is here. You were driving to Tivoli there, and Naya just joined us, and your mom just came in late, a little late, and she was waiting for you to get here. There you go. Okay, I don't think either one heard me.
Coffee or anything?
I really was, I just kept driving, I was going to Tivoli.
Do you want some coffee or anything?
I was saying,
Oatmeal cookie?
I'm drinking water.
I'll get it for you.
okay, okay, we have everybody here. I was telling Carol. I don't know if she has.
She's doing this.
Carol, Carol just came in late and Naya just joined, so we were waiting for your family to get here. Anyhow, prayers.
Yeah, we have a couple of people. Remember, our daughter Julie is not doing well. She has ulcerative colitis. And she's just not doing well. And our medical system, it's like it's designed to make things difficult. And so she's got school insurance now that she's a teacher. She's been being treated for this for 11 years. And suddenly they said, she and I were headed to San Antonio to get a colonoscopy. And on the way, they called and said, oh, you're going to have a referral. In 11 years.
Yeah, no.
Well, I'm just telling you, that's. the
But
way
she
it is.
changed.
Should have called me, and I should have.
Well, this happened a long time ago. Anyway, it happened earlier in the summer, but it's got to do with who's in the system and who, yeah, it's just been a mess, but she's not doing well. Please remember her. And Marco, you always call him Marky. So
He has a lot of nicknames. but
Sherry
Mark-
has a nickname for everyone.
Yes.
And he had
Marco,
his
yeah.
surgery and he did well.
He did well, but he's in a lot of pain, so thank you, Scott. It's harder than we thought it was, but he's. doing fine.
He had major jaw surgery, which seems to be the new theme right now.
Virginia Vaughn asked us to remember it's her son and daughter-in-law that are in a
Daughter and son.
daughter and son-in-law. That's not what you said.
Sorry.
I got it wrong. And that in a custody battle, and anytime something involved kids and the system, what can I tell you? It's painful. So please keep them in mind. Keep them in your prayers. And as always, Phil and Cherie, Phil with the Parkinson's, it's just a very heartbreaking battle. So God, we always come thankful. We see the love and concern that you have for us, but we see that echoed down for each other. And it's one of the things we're most thankful for. We ask for your hand on these that we've mentioned. We know there are others. You know their hearts and you know ours. But we're always concerned. We always each week have these people that we bring. And we come as a group and say, we would like your hand. We would like healing. We would like peace and strength in this. As we start this study, my prayer is for strength for us, that we can keep our eyes and our minds on the message that you have for us, and not in the trivia, the things that divide us, the things that confuse us. Bring us understanding, but through open hearts, make us ready for the message. Amen.
We are starting a new study today. I always get excited. And it's on Matthew. And we have studied 2 of the 4 Gospels. We studied Luke, which most people know is Scott's favorite. And then we studied the Gospel of John. And now we're going to study Matthew. And often people think, well, we've studied 2, what could we learn? But you can learn a lot. And one of the reasons we're studying Matthew is because it is a great segue from our study of Jacob. And the reason it is because Matthew, who he was speaking to and who he was so steeped in the Old Testament scriptures. And a couple of things that we'll find out today is of the four gospels, we've often said that the reason we study the Old Testament, one of the reasons we study it is referred to so often in the New Testament. It is referred to most often in the Gospel of Matthew. I believe there's 50 direct quotes and 70 some allusions to the Old Testament. So 120 times Matthew reaches back to the Old Testament to say something. To remind everyone, there's four gospels. 3 of them are considered synoptic gospels. The word synoptic is a Latin word that means seen together. They look like they're very similar. Their stories are similar. Obviously, it's the life of Christ, it would be similar. John's approach was different, and so it was not considered one of the synoptic gospels. Just some background. When it was written, who wrote it? We don't know. But the best knowledge, or what most people think, is that the Gospel of Matthew was written by Matthew. And Matthew was one of the 12, and he was a tax collector. And, we have mentioned the series numerous times, The Chosen. Just recently, The Chosen has been picked up on CW Network, which Scott was thinking that they had sold out, but CW Network has been sold, and they're cleaning up their act. They had a lot of questionable, strange shows on, and they've gotten rid of those, and they are now showing free The Chosen. So The Chosen has had 3 seasons, and it's the life of Christ. And the reason I'm going to put it out there again for you to watch is the character of Matthew. They they portray Matthew as someone on the spectrum, and it's just, and do we know that? Certainly not. But it is, I think, a wonderful sort of what Scott says is these were not cardboard characters, and making Matthew real. And so if you have a chance to watch some of The Chosen and watch the character of Matthew, I think it would bring life to this. We always tell people you don't need to go to Israel to love the Bible, but going to a trip to Israel definitely enhances your love for the Bible. And I sort of think that same way. You want to add something there?
Matthew's a tax collector. We know that much. In this time where the Romans rule, you have Jews who collect taxes for the Romans. And they're viewed as less than dogs. They are outcast, to say the least. They have I guess, a green light. As long as they collect enough taxes for Rome, they can collect extra and just pocket the rest. We see that in, third world places where police are able to do the same thing. And it's a bad situation, but they have a reputation for that. But mostly they're seen as turncoats. They're seen as people who have taken the Roman side in this occupation, and they are hated. And so Matthew is both a Jew with education in the law and, Torah. And at the same time, he's somebody who's been put outside the Jewish community. So he has an interesting perspective. His audience is going to be Jewish. It's not something that should be overlooked, that Luke was a Gentile and he's talking to Gentiles. Matthew was a Jew and he's talking to Jews. But what do you think the chances are that Matthew is going to be talking to Jews who have been cast out, to people who are not part of the inner circle? I would say probably pretty good. And so we're going to see beginning early in this, and it's one of the reasons I'm fairly content that this was written by Matthew. I got asked about that this morning. Remember, there's a time when Paul was in Rome, and we know that Luke was there writing stuff down for him. Does that mean that wasn't written by Paul? Well, no. I mean, if Luke did the penmanship, it doesn't really matter. But I'm fairly content that this is Matthew's work. And you'll see a perspective. And the perspective is important because we're human beings. And in order to receive a message, sometimes somebody will explain it to you in a way and you go, I don't relate to that. And someone else will tell you the same basic message a different way, and it just rings. You understand it. And the beauty of the Gospels, the four Gospels, is that they do take different approaches. They're not inconsistent with each other, but they take different approaches. So look for that. You're going to see an example of it in about the 3rd verse this morning.
The other question is like, when was the book of Matthew written? Once again, we don't know. Early church people thought that the book of Matthew was the first gospel written. So that's one of the reasons it was put first. Now, biblical scholars believe that Mark was probably written first, and then Luke, or then Matthew, and then Luke, and then John. It was probably written sometime between 70 and 85 AD. Okay. And there's biblical scholars sit there and try to decide, was it written? Everybody always wants to know, was things written before or after 70 AD? The reason 70 AD is so important, that's when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. And, can you tell by the way he wrote? I mean, as Scott kept telling me when I'm looking this stuff up, who cares? But that's about when it was written.
So one of my big concerns is always that there's a lot of commentary out there. And I never know what you're going to get exposed to. Nobody wants to tell a boring story. They want to come up with something revolutionary so that they get lots of hits on the internet. And so people just spin their own tales. And so I wind up listening to a whole bunch of other commentaries so that I have some idea of what you might come across. And it gets confusing. I don't take offense at this, but because it's really not directed at you, it's a lot of the people that do this. If you try and point something out to a dog, you point and say, look over there, the dog looks at your finger, right? And what happens with people looking into this, and like they try and figure out, when was this written? Who came first? I believe that these things, the people like Matthew didn't sit down and think, okay, I'm old, now I'm going to write down a lifetime of memoirs and recollections. I suspect they were keeping, as they were teaching, as they were going out, they wrote a lot of this down over a long period of time. And then at some point it's compiled. Does that make it less legitimate? I'm convinced that it doesn't. So, I may talk about some things, and some of you during this will go, why is he talking about this? It's because I know that there are things being taught that are really, really bizarre. And I'll give you one quick example and then we'll move on. But when we were in Israel, the Golden Dome, the big Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Palestinians, the Arabs say, there were never Jews in Jerusalem until fairly recently. So they needed to do some work on the foundations. And they knew what was going to happen. When you start digging out dirt, there are artifacts everywhere. So they came in the middle of the night with this flood of trucks, and they dug this stuff out and shipped it outside of town. And the Jews then went and did an upside down archaeological study. The top layer was the oldest, and the bottom layer was the newest, because that's the way they dumped the dirt. There are a lot of stories. There are, a lot of people with an agenda. And the one thing that I'm hoping is that we can put aside agenda, like trying to figure out, was it written before the temple was built? Probably parts of it were, some of it may not have been. It doesn't matter. When Matthew points things out, don't look at his finger, look at the message, and you're going to see that it's amazingly consistent with the rest of the message.
So what we wanted to do now is to show you a video. It's 8 minutes long, so get your cup of coffee. It's a short movie. We've shown these before. It's called The Bible Project. The gentleman who's done, who started these, we think has done an incredible job of giving you insight. This is on the first half of the book of Matthew, and I think it sets it up really well.
And just because it's cartoony, don't let it fool you. He does a really, really good job with this.
You want to share it? And I did the sound thing. I did find that.
Did you?
I did make sure.
Share screen.
Oh, it's not now. It's not now.
And if you have any trouble hearing anything, point or something, we'll,
Or write me.
yeah, text.
The Gospel according to Matthew. It's one of the earliest official accounts about Jesus of Nazareth, his life, his death, and his resurrection. The book itself is anonymous, but the earliest reliable tradition links it to Matthew the tax collector, who was one of the 12 apostles that Jesus appointed, and he actually appears within the book itself. For about 30 to 40 years, the apostles orally taught and passed on their eyewitness accounts about Jesus, along with his teachings that they had all memorized. And Matthew has then collected and arranged all these into this amazing tapestry and designed the book to highlight certain themes about Jesus. In this video, we're just going to cover the first half of the book. Specifically, Matthew wants to show how Jesus is the continuation and fulfillment of the whole biblical story about God and Israel. That Jesus is the Messiah from the line of David, that he is a new authoritative teacher like Moses, and not only that, Jesus is God with us, or in Hebrew, Emmanuel. And Matthew's designed this book with an introduction and then a conclusion, and these act like a frame around 5 clear sections right here in the center, each of which concludes with a long block of Jesus' teaching. Now this design is very intentional and it's amazing. Just watch how this works. Chapters 1 through 3, they set the stage by attaching Jesus' story right onto the storyline of the Old Testament scriptures. So Matthew opens with a genealogy about Jesus that highlights how he is from the messianic line of the son of David, and he's a son of Abraham. That means he's going to bring God's blessing to all of the nations. After that, we get the famous story about Jesus' birth and how all of the events fulfilled the Old Testament prophetic promises, that the nations would come and honor the Messiah, that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, but even more than that, Jesus' conception by the Holy Spirit, his name Emmanuel, all these work together to show that Jesus is no mere human. He is God with us, God become human. So you can see 2 of Matthew's key themes right here in the introduction. He's from the line of David, he's Emmanuel. But Matthew also wants to show how Jesus is a new Moses. So like Moses, Jesus came up out of Egypt, he passed through the waters of baptism, and he entered into the wilderness for 40 days. And then Jesus goes up onto a mountain to deliver his new teaching. So through all of this, Matthew is claiming that Jesus is the promised greater than Moses figure who's going to deliver Israel from slavery. He's going to give them new divine teaching. He's going to save them from their sins and bring about a new covenant relationship between God and his people. This Moses and Jesus parallel also explains why Matthew has structured the center of the book the way that he did. These 5 main parts highlight Jesus as a teacher, and he's created a parallel. Jesus as a teacher parallels the 5 books of Moses. Jesus is the new authoritative covenant teacher who's going to fulfill the storyline of the Torah. Now, in the first section, chapters 4 to 7, Jesus steps onto the scene announcing the arrival of God's kingdom, and this is really key. The kingdom is, in essence, about God's rescue operation for his whole world, and it's taking place through King Jesus. Jesus has come to confront evil, especially spiritual evil, and its whole legacy of demon oppression and disease and death. Jesus has come to restore God's rule and reign over the whole world by creating a new family of people who will follow him, obey his teachings, and live under his rule. So, after Jesus begins healing people and forming a movement, a community, he takes his followers out to a mountain or a hillside, and he delivers his first big block of teaching, traditionally called the Sermon on the Mount. And here Jesus explores what it looks like to follow him and live in God's kingdom. And it's an upside-down kingdom where there are no privileged members. So the poor, the nobodies, the wealthy, the religious, everybody is invited and is called to turn, to repent, and to follow Jesus and join his family. Jesus says that he's not here to set aside the commands of the Torah or the Old Testament. Rather, he's here to fulfill all of that through his life, through his teachings. He's here to transform the hearts of his people so that they can truly love God and love their neighbor, including their enemy. After concluding his great teaching on the kingdom, the next section shows Jesus bringing the kingdom into reality in the day-to-day lives of people. So Matthew's arranged here 9 stories about Jesus bringing the power of God's kingdom into the lives of hurting, broken people. There are 3 groups of 3 stories, and they're all about people who are sick or have broken bodies or they're in danger, and Jesus heals or saves them by these acts of grace and power. And then right in between these triads, we find 2 parallel stories about Jesus' call that people should follow him. Matthew's making a point here. One can only experience the power of Jesus' grace by following him and becoming his disciple. Now, after Matthew has shown the power of the kingdom through Jesus, Jesus then extends his reach by sending out the 12 disciples who are going to go do what he's been doing. And this leads to the second large block of teaching, chapter 10. And here, Jesus teaches his disciples how to announce the kingdom and what to expect once they do. Many among Israel are accepting Jesus and his offer of the kingdom, but Israel's leaders, they aren't. They stand to lose a lot if they repent and become disciples of Jesus. And so Jesus knows they're going to reject him and persecute his followers, which is exactly what happens. In the next section, chapters 11 through 13, Matthew has collected a group of stories about how people are responding to Jesus and his message, and it's a mixed bag. So some stories are positive. People love Jesus and they think he's the Messiah. Others are more neutral, like John the Baptist, or even the members of Jesus' own family, and they make it clear that Jesus is not what they expected. And then you have Israel's leaders. They're entirely negative. You have the Pharisees and the Bible scholars. They all reject Jesus together. They think he's a false teacher. He's leading the people astray. They think he's blasphemous in these exalted claims he's making about himself. But Jesus isn't surprised or thrown by all these diverse responses. In fact, he focuses on it in the third block of teaching, chapter 13. Here, Matthew's collected together a bunch of Jesus' parables about the kingdom, like about a farmer throwing seed on 4 types of soil, or about a mustard seed, or a pearl or buried treasure. These parables are like a commentary on the stories that you've just read in chapters 11 and 12. Some people are accepting Jesus with enthusiasm. Others are rejecting him. But God's kingdom is of ultimate value, and it will not stop spreading despite all of these obstacles. So that's the first half of the Gospel according to Matthew. Now here's a few more things to look for as you read through these chapters. Matthew's presenting Jesus, remember, as the continuation and fulfillment of the Old Testament storyline. So look for how he weaves in quotations from the Old Testament scriptures. And what you'll find is that they're placed at strategic points in the story, explaining more about Jesus and his identity. So stop, take time to go look up these references and read them in their Old Testament context. And most often you'll discover really cool, interesting connections. Lastly, pay attention to the types of people who accept Jesus and follow him. And you'll see that it's most often people who are unimportant, they're nobodies, or they're irreligious. And these are the people who are transformed by their trust or faith in Jesus and follow him. And it's the religious and the prideful who are offended by him. So how is this tension between Jesus and Israel's leaders going to play itself out? That's what the second half of Matthew is all about.
Okay.
Okay. So like I said, we really like that Bible project. I will send out with the link of the recording, I'll send out a PDF, and it shows that whole Matthew, the first and second half of it together. It's really good. And so when we get to the second half, we'll go over that, but you can always it's one of those things I can listen to several times and you always pick up something. But this idea of it being written in 5 sections, this isn't this guy's only, I mean, he's not the only one that says it. If you go out there, most people that study Matthew in detail realize it's written in 5 sections. And for someone who's like an organization freak such as myself and loves to outline things, I am just like, it makes so much sense to me. Here's this number guy who's a tax collector, and he has organized the life of Jesus and the way he's going to tell the good news in this type of structure. And keep in mind that some people will criticize and say they'll look at Matthew versus Luke and they'll say some of the stories are in different orders. Matthew wasn't writing a chronological on Jesus' life. His purpose wasn't to put it in chronological order. It was to put it in theme order. He was doing 5 lessons and he was doing the stories to go into those 5 teaching moments.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, so the Bible Project, does it do the entire Bible?
It does. It's just,
And you can just Google it.
you can Google it
Go to
and
YouTube.
yeah,
It's
you,
really fabulous. I want to do that.
yeah, they have lots of different, yeah, it's very good.
So let's start with the
Okay.
scriptures.
We are going to start with Matthew 1 and I'm not going to read, Scott's going to read
It
because
has a lot of names.
it has a lot of names and I would ruin them.
So remember the importance that the Jews place on genealogy, on lineage. And also remember, we just got done with the study of Jacob, and that starts with the promise made to Abraham, made again to his son Isaac, and made again to Jacob. So Matthew, being a Jew, begins by trying to establish that he's bona fide, he's who he's supposed to be with genealogy. It's not surprising. And he says, this is the record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, obviously not the first generation son, but the son of David, the son of Abraham. This is the way they talk. This is the way they think. He's from the lineage of those two. And everyone is aware who's been steeped in Jewish, scriptures, that the Messiah, the one who's to come, is going to come from the house of David. It's going to be a descendant of Abraham. So Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. That ought to look incredibly familiar to all of you who were in this last study of Jacob. And that's where he begins. Now, I want you to look at the very next verse. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Okay, Judah was a son of Jacob, son of Israel. Tamar was his daughter-in-law.
Remember, we did not read that chapter, but we talked about it. It was.
And it's a long and sordid story, but Tamar was married to one of Judah's sons, and the son died. And as is the custom, it's known as levirate marriage. She then marries one of the brothers, one of Judah's other sons, and he dies. And now Judah says, you're supposed to marry the third brother, but that's not happening. The last 2 died. And so he says, well, the thing is, he's way too young. Wait around and we'll see. What he was doing was holding out. And Tamar goes and concocts this scheme where she poses as a prostitute and sleeps with Judah, her father-in-law, and conceives a child. This is not a thing that is smiled upon in good Jewish circles, okay? Judah realizes he's done wrong. But the point is, we could get into a lot. This is not a study about Judah and Tamar. But Matthew includes this reference right after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you notice he says that Judah was the father of Perez. Perez was not born to Tamar. So if he wants to tell the genealogy, all he has to do is talk about Perez and we're good. And instead, Matthew goes to the trouble of mentioning Tamar, who prostituted herself, and this child that's born in this way. This is something, if you were going to write the lineage of Messiah and you were one of the Jewish leaders, you would leave this out. You don't have to talk about it. It's unsanitary, right? Just, and I hate to say this, but you know, it's been in the recent headlines that one of our leaders has left one of his grandchildren out of the family line because her mother was a stripper. This stuff happens. And so if you're going to write a lineage of the Messiah in that time to Jews, you probably would want to leave that out. We don't talk about.
And
this.
besides that, you're listing man, and all of a sudden we say, have a woman on the
Oh,
side.
and by the way, here's Tamar, who prostituted herself, and this extra child. Matthew sees fit to include that. So Matthew is pointing out, if the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, who are so prideful, he is going to a great length to put something in here that will displease them. Jesus always did that. Jesus said things that offended them constantly, okay? Matthew is telling the truth, the whole truth, and it's not going to be pleasant for the people who are very prideful. So it's an odd thing to add in, and it's one of the reasons, one of many, that I'm satisfied saying Matthew wrote this, because it's written from a perspective, of an accountant, and I'm an accountant from an accounting professor father. But as Mary said, the way it's organized, but also the fact that Matthew was an outcast. And Matthew is going to point out in the lineage of Jesus are also outcasts. You see what's going on? Yes, sir.
So a couple of quick questions. Just to follow what you're saying, so my book, which I'm reading, Baroness Bible, says the same thing. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, by Tamar.
Okay, it depends. There are no commas. So he's the father of Perez, comma, and Sarah by Tamar. That is just a fact. It looks like, and that's why I kind of brought it out, because you could read that and think that Tamar gave birth to both of those children. She did not.
So,
We have an accounting of it.
okay, there's no commas.
Right, there's not. And in Hebrew, there are no commas. And so we have to,
Okay, so who was Judah's real wife?
I don't remember her name.
And since he had a real wife
No,
who bore him,
Am I wrong?
you are wrong. Tamar, when the time came for Tamar to give birth, there were twins in her womb.
Oh, I am absolutely wrong. There we go.
So Tamar was Perez's mother.
There's another story that I'm mixed in. You're correct, I'm wrong. Perez and the girl were twins. Yeah, Sarah were twins.
and so
And that's Genesis 39, Genesis 38, verse 27, sorry.
Yep, there you go.
so then Judah just had these two children, period.
You know, we can go back to his lineage. I mean, it's
Well, I mean-
painstaking.
Yeah, if Matthew is doing what he's doing, and you know, whether it's to spite the Pharisees and Sadducees, I don't know. But I mean, he's not making any other comments about Judah's children other than these two. And they're trying to describe or point out the lineage of Jesus Christ. The other thing I guess I want to just mention is, I mean, all of these gospels, yes, they were written by these human beings, but this is Holy Spirit inspired.
Absolutely, I
And
say it.
so whether they were their mindset as what, let's say an accountant or, somebody who follows the numbers or whatever, OCD, whatever you want to call it. I don't know that, I wouldn't say that that was the predominant theme as to why they wrote the way they wrote. Because if they're inspired by the Holy Spirit, it's not even really, I mean, yes, the Holy Spirit is using them, but. it's
Okay, so
really
the question comes down about, and the next study is going to be about how we got our Bible, and it'll talk about inspiration a lot. But when we say the Bible is inspired, the words are inspired, does anyone think that God dictates, that a person sits and takes dictation? That's, I would think that that's probably not them just sitting down and writing that way. They do still tell it as humans. Absolutely inspired. But you notice that the 12 are very different people. They're fishermen, there's tax collectors, there's a zealot who's like a revolutionary. There are all these different people. And they're going to be used to then take that message out. Does it not make sense that they're going to have probably, each will have different approach, and each will probably appeal to different people in different ways? And I think it's by design. And so this is one of the things that I knew was not new, but I suspect is going to happen, is that we tend to get bogged down in things that may not be profitable. Did the Holy Spirit inspire these scriptures? Absolutely. Through human beings. And we are human. And it's one of the things I try to stress often. We're human, but these people in the Bible are not two-dimensional, cardboard cutouts. They were human. And we see their weakness at times. We see James and John, the sons of thunder, tell Jesus there's a little town that's rejected them. And they say, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and have them, burnt to a crisp? Now, that story is in there, and it shows fallibility. It shows that they are human. And they're James and John. They're part of the 12. They had to grow out of that. He called them the sons of thunder for a reason. I personally think that this lineage of Jesus, were it being told, one of the reasons they reject him is probably some of the things in there, but if it were being told by the Jewish leaders of the time, they would sanitize it. And I know that because they sanitize a whole bunch of stuff. I've read through the Jewish histories enough that I know how they do. They don't want these unsanitary things in there. We're going to read in just a minute more about another person in his lineage who, by the ideas of the leaders, the Jewish leaders, shouldn't be there. It's one of the reasons the Jewish leaders reject him. Remember, he's from Nazareth. Do you remember them saying, has anything good ever come from Nazareth? He can't be the Messiah. He's from stinking Nazareth, right? Nothing good comes from Nazareth. And so what I'm telling you, what we're telling you is that some of these things are in here that don't conform to the hierarchy, the leaders' prideful view of who Messiah is going to be. And I'm going to, just because it ties this together, skip ahead just a moment. When the angel comes to Joseph, he says, you'll call him Yeshua, which is deliverer, because he will save your people from their sin, not save them from the Romans. Now, it's a theme that's been beaten to death, that they think he's going to be a conqueror who will deliver them from Romans or anybody else. And they're told directly, no, that's not who he is. That's not who he's intended to be. And if you, with that knowledge, go back and look at the prophecies, all of a sudden your eyes get opened and you go, oh, that was never who was being prophesied. So by doing this, by not sanitizing it, he's showing a message, I believe, that is consistent with the entire life and ministry of Jesus. So,
And I want you to get back to that. I'm going to take one side thing on Genesis 46, verse 12. It says that the sons of Judah, so Judah had 5 sons, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Sarah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And then Perez had 2 sons. So, but as Scott says, he's pointing out that, so Judah had 2 sons and the mother was his daughter-in-law. The other one was from his wife.
you remember, and that's the thing, I want you guys to be confident in these things. Luke starts out saying, I'm writing this so that you can be confident in the things you've been told. Judah, if you remember in Jacob's prophecy, he said the scepter, the rulership will not depart from the house of Judah. Now the question comes up about the wives that Judah has. Remember, Tamar was married to Judah's son. So clearly she wasn't the mother of all of his children. He had another wife. She was married to his second son. Clearly she wasn't the mother of the man she was married to. He had another wife. I just had forgotten that they were twins. Just the same, the woman who bears Perez prostituted herself to father or to bear a child by her father-in-law. This is not a thing that plays nicely in the lineage of Messiah if you're prideful. So can we move on?
Yes, please. No.
Is it the silver lining here that the truth, that nothing but the truth is being told,
Yes,
even if it stinks a little bit?
yes, yes. And
How can you have God and partake
he looks,
part of a lie?
the people who Jesus calls look like us. You have the Pharisees and Sadducees who have set themselves up as being something better and unattainable for common people. And the people who follow Jesus, which is what this is about, look like us. And he makes the point that in the lineage of Messiah are people who look like us. There are things that are, they are people, they're human beings. I'm a human being. I take comfort in this because I can see that it's not limited only to people who are perfect. So,
Okay, so we're on, start at 3.
all right.
Judah was the father.
Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. This is going to get,
There you go.
well,
Salome.
Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, or Rahab, as you're used to calling her. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. So now, I know this gets tedious, but Boaz, we find in the book of Ruth. Okay? Boaz was the son of a woman named Rahab or Rahab. She was also a prostitute. She was in Jericho. And when Israel was about to take the promised land, they sent some people into Jericho and Rahab rescued them. Rahab, they found out and they were going to kill them, and Rahab hid them and then lowered them out her window down the wall and let them get away. And because of that, she was rewarded. But she's in the direct lineage of the Messiah. She's a prostitute. And what happens? Boaz, her son, marries a girl named Ruth, who is a Moabite. And they were not supposed to intermarry with the Moabites, and yet this one did, and he winds up in the lineage of Jesus, the Messiah. You see what's being told to us here. Rahab was rewarded for what she did. Ruth is rewarded for who she is and what she did. And Ruth says, your family will be my family and your God will be my God. And even though she's a Moabite, she's part of this lineage. This is what we're being told. And it runs through here,
Take it at least down to here. when we
take
do
it at least down to here, all
Yeah,
right?
yeah, keep going a little bit more.
All right. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David, the king. Jesse's family were shepherds. They were not who you would normally think of as being the lineage of King David, but they were. David was the youngest, not the firstborn. And we see all of these things that are just upside down. Do you remember in that Bible project where he says, the kingdom is an upside down kingdom? The first shall be last, right? If you want to be the greatest, you become the last. This is all upside down. And it is constantly like that through Jesus' ministry, that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. That's what we're seeing through this lineage. He is affirming the genealogy, but at the same time, he is affirming the message that we're going to hear from Jesus throughout this whole gospel.
That first section was 14 generations, and then it splits it up to the word next. And the next line was David was the father of Solomon by Uriah's wife. Love that one.
Here's the next one. David is the father of Solomon, and he could have just said by Bathsheba and let it go at that. That would have been much more pleasant. If you remember, David saw Bathsheba bathing on the roof and he wanted her, and she was married. So he sends her husband out to the front lines to get killed. And the guy, you know, it's a long story, but he sends the man out to be killed. And the moment he's killed, it covers up the fact he actually brought him in for one night. So it would cover up the fact that Bathsheba is already pregnant. Now, he could have left that out. He could have said that David was the father of Solomon by Bathsheba. And instead, he says the father of Solomon by Uriah's wife. Not David's wife, Uriah's wife. So you can't escape that in this. You have to see that Matthew has gone to the trouble of calling her Uriah's wife. He's got a point to this. We need to see that point. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, Abijah, the father of Asa. Do I have to keep going?
No, you can. So we go on to, there's 14, and then there's 14 other generations down to verse 12, that says, after the exile to Babylon, then there's 14. So Matthew divides Jesus's genealogy into 14 generations. And you just want to read at the end, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. So it's 14, 14, and 14. And the question comes, there's only two of the Gospels that go on to genealogy. One is Luke and one is Matthew. Matthew does it at the very beginning, before the birth story. Luke does it right before Jesus goes out for his public ministry. And Luke goes backwards. He goes from Jesus backwards all the way to Adam. And Matthew goes from Abraham to Jesus. Luke goes back 70 generations, and Matthew goes 14 times 3. They're different, they're not the same, and one of them goes through from Mary. Luke goes from Mary backwards, and Matthew goes from Abraham to Joseph, to Jesus.
So the point in all this, as tedious as it is that Matthew, and okay, yes, he's inspired, but he inspired someone who has the knowledge of the Jewish lineage. And because he's a Jew, his words are going to be received by other Jews differently than someone like Luke, who's a Gentile. He puts in there these things that, because one of the other things we've tried to stress, if you go back to the Old Testament, you see that it was never the intention that Gentiles be left out. The Jewish leadership at this time, it's not just the leadership, but the Jews have gotten to the point that anyone who's not a good Jew is out. They're not a part of this. And we see so many places in the Old Testament where God, speaking through prophets, makes it clear this is for everyone. My house shall be a house of prayer for all people. And he talks about taking in the outsiders, the sojourners, and the eunuchs. The eunuchs are completely left out. These people at this time the Jews wouldn't have anything to do with them as part of Jewish society. But we see that God's plan always included them. And that's what this genealogy should be telling you. Yes, here is the plan. Here's the genealogy, but you also see these other people. It's not an exclusive, and it never was supposed to be.
I'm going to read, we're almost at the end. I was reading a discussion on the difference of the two genealogies between Matthew and Luke, and the gentleman made a conclusion that I loved, and it says problems in scriptures works like speed bumps. They may be frustrating as they can do damage to the unwary, but they effectively slow us down and focus our attention. Tensions provoke thought. Apparent contradictions force us to wrestle with the text in greater detail. When God inspired them, he knew what he was doing. And so I think if you take that as your bottom line belief, you're not going to see them as contradictions, but as different ways of looking at the situation. And
most of them are not even contradictions.
Yeah.
I mean, you look, if you understand, there are things that these people would have understood that we don't, just because it's a different time. But I would caution not to get so bogged down into those kind of details that you miss the big picture, the message that's supposed to be coming through to us. The next verses are going to talk about the angel coming to Joseph. And I told you, since we don't have time, Mary doesn't want to end, start the next thing, but the angel appears to Joseph and he tells him, what do we always hear the angel? What's the first thing they say? Fear not. Thank you, Gene. Fear not. Don't be afraid. Over and over and over again. That's the thing that plagues us. And the first thing they get is fear not. But he tells him that this child, fear not, the child is conceived by the Holy Spirit. There's nothing wrong here. But he tells him, you shall call his name Yeshua. We say Jesus, but that name is Yeshua. That's Joshua. Some people are going to like that, but Joshua was called Yeshua. Joshua is seen as a deliverer of his people. Yeshua is deliverance or deliverer. But then he says he's going to be called Yeshua, not like Joshua, who brought, in military, delivered his people. He's going to be Yeshua because he will save or deliver his people from their sins. So Matthew has gone to great trouble. In fact, we're going to see it, but he's going to quote some prophecies. He is establishing, yes, this is the long promised Messiah. He has all the qualifications. He comes from the right place. He comes from the right people. He has the proper lineage. All the things that were prophesied are there. But all of this myth that you've been told that he's come to rescue us from Romans is just not true. And all of the myth that you've been told that people from the outside are not entitled to receive this deliverance are not true. He's doing both things, and it's extremely, extremely important. I don't know, any other comments you got? No? Sorry that this part is tedious. It won't be after this.
Well, I sort of don't think it's tedious. I think, in the past, I would have always just not read the genealogy because it didn't do anything for me. It's a bunch of names I can't pronounce. But especially the first part, now that we just did the life of Jacob, I hear it much differently. And we knew those stories because we did David also. And I told Scott after reading it, we didn't read all the names through Babylon because once again, those names don't mean a darn thing to me. But I said to Scott, when we do the next Old Testament one, I want to do something about the exile to Babylon. I want to understand those. What do we figure out how many years?
70.
70 years when they were in Babylon and figure out what they were doing. But so after you read some of those stories in the Old Testament, I don't think that genealogy is as tedious as you think it was.
Well, since we have a couple of minutes, just real quick, if you go read this and you read the names, I've mentioned this before, but the names, a lot of them, if you see one like Hezekiah was the one who came back from Babylon, right? But it ends in that IAH, that's YAH. That stands for Yahweh. That name means God strengthens. Anytime you see these biblical names, that end in IAH, it's something about Yahweh. And if it has L, especially if it ends in EL, that means God. So a lot of these names are very, very significant through here. And yeah, the exile to Babylon figures strong in the prophecies. We studied Daniel some time back, and Daniel is taken off to Babylon, and just sort of like Joseph, he becomes the #1 guy in the government, right? But he never leaves his worship of Yahweh. That exile to Babylon is a big part of this. And I think we should probably do some other studies, but as you read these names, look for EL, like Elijah. That actually has both L at the front and Yah at the end. That's God, or L is God. The names have meaning. We don't have time to go into all of it, but this genealogy is so rich with prophecy and significance. It establishes this is the Messiah. You just look for the wrong thing. God, we ask for hearts that look for understanding, that look for your truth and not our own. We look for the message, and we look for the deliverance, and we look for the proof. We look for the faith that lets us see that and embrace it. It is the thing that changes us. And as we study, let us ask questions, but give us the open hearts to see that what's important through all of this is that you have a plan that includes us. You made a long plan that leads through all of this and directly now to us, and we're a part of it. Always go with us, always remind us through the week that we're not alone, that we're part of a great plan, and you went to great lengths, not only to enact it, but to make sure that we understand it and embrace it. Amen.
Amen. You guys can unmute yourself. Virginia, Paula and Cindy were at the Broadmoor on this past week. You probably were both there at the same time. Yeah, you're still muted. I know you're driving, but I thought that was funny.
Thank you very much. I have like 3% battery. So I'm going.
There you go. You guys have a good week.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. We will. We will.
Have a great trip, Cheryl.
Yes.
Be safe.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all. Have a good week.
Thank